Good morning and welcome to the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month celebration. May is one month that is specifically dedicated to celebrating the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities in the United States. During this 90 minutes webinar, speakers will discuss historical and contemporary issues that affect the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. Considering the recent attacks on the Asian American community, this event takes on particular importance. I would like to, before we start, I would like to quickly mention that this event is being recorded. So we assume your consent if you're going to be present throughout the webinar. And I would like to extend a couple of gratitudes. First to the UC Berkeley Library Administration for being supportive of this event. Then to my colleagues, Dylan Davis and Sky Van Valkenburg of the Institute of East Asian Studies, who have made this webinar possible through their unending support. And also my colleague, Sine Hong Jensen, who is our Asian American Studies librarian at the Ethnic Studies Library, who, along with Dr. Lisa Hirai Suchitani, motivated me to take on this seemingly formidable task and made it possible for me to invite all of us to this wonderful celebration. Now I will introduce our distinguished speaker who will provide opening remarks. Dr. Lisa Hirai Suchitani is a faculty in the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies program of the Department of Ethnic Studies at University of California, Berkeley. She is the recipient of Chancellor's Public Service Faculty Award for Community Engaged Learning for year 2021. She is a graduate of the Asian American Studies, East Asian Studies, and Social and Cultural Studies programs at UC Berkeley. Dr. Suchitani centers her research, teaching, and advocacy efforts on critical race theory, critical pedagogy, and educational equity issues. She serves as the founder and chair of the Japanese American Studies Advisory Committee, board chair of the Japanese American Women Alumni of UC Berkeley, and faculty co-chair of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Standing Committee, an advisory body under the executive sponsorship of the Vice Chancellor of Equity and Inclusion, dedicated to increasing awareness about and developing strategies to address campus climate issues for AAPI students, staff, and faculty. She is the recipient of the 2021 of Chancellor's Public Service Faculty Award, as I had mentioned, for community engaged teaching. And I'm going to welcome now Dr. Lisa Hirai Suchitani to provide us with her opening remarks. Lisa, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilidar, for your most kind introduction. Good morning. So nice to be here in community with all of you. Before we get started, I wanted to offer a land acknowledgement. While we may be located in disparate spaces geographically, I would like to formally begin this event by recognizing that the virtual location which connects us to each other today, UC Berkeley, occupies the territory of Huichin, the unceded stolen land of the Chochenyo Ohlone, ancestral land which continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people. On behalf of the UC Berkeley Library, the Ethnic Studies Library, the Asian American and Pacific Islander Standing Committee, the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies Program, the Asian American Research Center, the Asian Pacific American System-Wide Alliance, Asian Pacific American Student Development, and the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, thank you for joining us today to commemorate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month through this convening of thought leaders who not only have increased national attention to the diverse and intersectional needs of Asian American, and Pacific Islander communities in the US, but also have challenged through their scholarship and leadership the ways in which AAPI communities in this country continue to be racialized as perpetually foreign. Between March 2020 and March 2021, Stop AAPI Hate, a nonprofit organization dedicated to tracking and responding to incidents of hate, violence, harassment, and discrimination against Asians, Asian Americans, and Pacific Islanders, received over 6,600 reports of hate incidents against APIs across the country. The majority of these incidents have targeted women and elders. 40% of these incidents were reported in California alone. In the wake of these increasing incidents of systemic hate and violence against API communities, the work of our panelists and events such as this have become all the more critical in our efforts to realize an anti-racist vision for our communities. Thank you again to Dr. Lilidar Pence and our sponsors for making this event possible. At this time, I am pleased to introduce our three panelists for today, Dr. Valerie Matsumoto, Dr. Lok Siu, and Lessa Hanani Opua Pelayo Lozada, who will each speak for 10 to 15 minutes about their respective areas of work. Following their remarks, there will be a question and answer period. Please feel free to send any queries you might have using that feature on Zoom. Dr. Valerie J. Matsumoto is a professor in the Department of History and the Department of Asian American Studies at UCLA. In addition to her book, City Girls, The Nisei Social World in Los Angeles, 1920 to 1950, she is the author of Farming the Home Place, a Japanese American community in California, 1919 to 1982, and co-editor of the essay collection, Over the Edge, Remapping the American West. She has received the UCLA Distinguished Teaching Award, the Toshio and Doris Hoshide Distinguished Teaching Award, and the Award for Excellence in Graduate Mentoring and Teaching from the UCLA Asian American Studies Graduate Student Association. In 2017, she was appointed to the George and Sakae Aratani Endowed Chair on the Japanese American Incarceration, Redress, and Community. The title of her presentation this morning is Japanese American History and Food, Adaptability and Creativity. Dr. Lok Siu is a cultural anthropologist and associate professor of the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies program and the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley, the chair of Berkeley's Academic Senate Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Campus Climate. She also is an affiliated faculty member in anthropology, the Center for Race and Gender, the Center for Chinese Studies, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Berkeley Food Institute. Her research and teaching efforts focus on such issues as Asians in the Americas, belonging and citizenship, comparative and relational studies of race, gender, and class, and the cultural politics of food. A two-time recipient of the Social Science Book Award from the National Association of Asian American Studies, she has published 4 books and volumes, as well as numerous articles and book chapters. Dr. Siu's presentation today will focus on anti-Asian hate, race, nation, and belonging. Lessa Kananiopua Pelayo Lozada is the Adult Services Assistant Manager at the Palos Verdes Library District in Southern California, and recently was elected the 2021-2022 President-elect of the American Library Association. She is an active member of the Association of Library Service to Children, the Rainbow Roundtable, the Social Responsibilities Roundtable, and the Sustainability Roundtable. She is also a member of several American Library Association professional affiliates, including the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, the Chinese American Libraries Association, the American Indian Library Association, and Reforma, the National Association to Promote Library and Information Services to Latinos and the Spanish-speaking. She lives in San Pedro, California, with her poet husband, Christian Hans Lozada, and their menagerie of pets. She will be discussing the Hawaiian practice and value of kuleana, our responsibility to each other. Please join me in welcoming our panelists for today.
Thank you to Librarianship for inviting me, and I want to say it's a pleasure to be part of this program with Professors Laxiu, Lisa Hirai Tsuchitani, and Lessa Palayo Losada. I am joining you from UCLA, where we acknowledge the Gabrielino Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tovangar, the Los Angeles Basin, and South Channel Islands. Food offers a valuable pathway to primary sources that can help us access the history and networks of Japanese Americans and other ethnic communities. Exploring ideas and practices related to food illuminates the vital work of women and the dynamic process of maintaining, adapting, and creating ethnic culture. Today, I will talk about pre-war Japanese American food with a brief mention of conditions in the World War II camps, and then we'll discuss the role of food in post-war community rebuilding. The ethnic press, World War II camp art, autobiographies, girls' club records, and community cookbooks show the adaptability and creativity that have shaped Japanese American food. Also, two terms that I use are issei and nisei. Issei refers to Japanese immigrants, literally meaning first generation. Nisei refers to their US-born second generation children. The food prepared by Issei and Nisei women in the pre-World War II period reflects their efforts to sustain family, community, and ethnic cultural practices, as well as to cross social and cultural boundaries. In the context of race relations in the 1920s and 30s, the preparation and consumption of Western dishes can be read not only as a sign of interest in new flavors, but also as a way of claiming and demonstrating being American. Their tastes also show the influence of regional demographics and interactions with other ethnic minority groups, especially here in California. At the same time, Nisei women continued to maintain symbolic holiday fare and imaginatively experiment with familiar Japanese dishes. Culinary experimentation also interested Issei women, such as the mother of Mary Nishi Ishizuka, who excelled at both Japanese and Western cooking. She made mouth-watering Japanese pickles and sukiyaki, as well as corn chowder. Ishizuka remembered fondly, quote, the bottles and bottles of root beer that she made for us, end quote. Many Japanese women shared culinary knowledge with their friends. Urban Issei women also encountered new dishes through jobs as domestic workers in white households and from neighbors. For example, Setsuko Matsunaga Nishi recalled that her mother learned from an African-American neighbor how to bake deep dish apple pie. Issei Takahonda attended adult classes in English and cooking at the Norris Dairy School in West Los Angeles, where she learned how to prepare a Thanksgiving dinner. And she learned how to make pumpkin pie, her daughter Rose recalled, as well as banana nut bread and cookies. We had peanut butter cookies coming out of our ears, end quote. Many Nisei girls also encountered and learned to prepare Western dishes in school. For example, my mother, Sachi Fuji Matsumoto, who grew up in then rural East Oakland, remembers how her older sister Ritsu introduced the whole family to cheese when she learned to make cheese biscuits in a junior high school cooking class. My mom says she thought it was the best thing she had ever tasted. Ritsu was a talented baker, also producing delicious cakes. Most Issei women did not know how to bake, as homes in Japan did not usually have ovens in the early 20th century. So it was often the Nisei who first learned to make Western confections. Indeed, it was children who introduced their parents to American customs, such as celebrating birthdays. In Japan at that time, everyone turned a year older at New Year's, and individual birthdays were not celebrated. But Nisei children wanted the kinds of festivities their friends and classmates had, and Issei parents wanted to please them. Here we see a beautiful cake is the centerpiece of a Nisei girl's birthday party in East Los Angeles around 1936. You can also see the children are enjoying bottles of soda. The preparation and consumption of food became a bonding experience for Nisei girls, particularly as part of their club activities. which thrived in West Coast cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Often excluded from school clubs due to racism, they formed their own lively networks. Together, they experimented with making foods unfamiliar to their parents, like seafoam candy and fudge. They often utilized their culinary skills on behalf of their clubs, holding box lunch socials and cookie sales to raise money for club activities and community service projects.
Oh, Valerie, I'm sorry for interrupting. We're getting some feedback from the audience that's saying they're hearing a staticky feedback sound from your speaker. It might be if you're using a note card that it's hitting the speaker sound.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
All right.
no worries. And sorry,
Right.
everyone. Okay.
Tell me if this is better. Oh, hopefully this will be better. So from the 1920s, Japanese Americans displayed interest not only in Japanese cuisine, but also Western dishes. Other ethnic cuisines also held appeal. By the mid-1930s, the Nisei women appear to have been most interested in three areas of cuisine: Japanese, American, and Chinese. The Nisei women found some culinary instructions in the recipes offered by the Rafu Shimpo newspaper. In a time when few ethnic cookbooks appeared in English, the Japanese American newspapers in Los Angeles and San Francisco constituted an important resource for second-generation women who wished to prepare Japanese dishes, and clearly many of them did. In 1936, the Rafu Shimpo reported, "In many of the American homes of Japanese descent, we find that a large part of the food habits handed down by the elders are being perpetuated," adding optimistically that Japanese meals will continue to be served long after the first generation will have passed on, end quote. One of the gems in the Japanese American National Museum's archival collection reflects Nisei women's desire to maintain Japanese home cooking, as well as the ways in which their dishes reveal evolving tastes and a widening range of ingredients. In 1930s Los Angeles, Natsue Fujimoto, a Nisei teenager, compiled a booklet she titled Recipes, Japanese, carefully documenting the food her family enjoyed and considered Japanese. She included dishes ranging from nasuni, or sauteed eggplant, and traditional New Year's ozoni soup to baked flatfish and shrimp salad. On many of the recipes, as you can see, she noted serves 5, the number in the Fujimoto family. This suggests that these dishes constituted part of her family's regular diet. Fujimoto's shrimp salad with pineapple and cucumber shows how Japanese immigrant families adapted the idea of the Western salad, dressing theirs with Japanese sweet wine, vinegar, ginger, and mustard. Women's culinary experimentation and improvisation stimulated the development of hybrid forms that became part of Japanese American cuisine. For instance, the Rafu Shimpo offered a recipe for pakkai, or sweet and sour pork, that reflects this hybridization. Among the ingredients were katakuriko, a Japanese starch, soy sauce, green chili pepper, which is an element of regional Mexican-American cuisine, and a can of pineapple, hinting at the labor migration routes that Chinese and Japanese settlers pursued from Hawaii to the continental United States. Japanese immigrants and their children drew on a rich array of culinary traditions in the multi-ethnic landscape of the US West. From the mid-1920s to the Second World War, ethnic holiday food held deep importance for Japanese Americans, urban and rural. Issei and Nisei women played a crucial role in preparing the symbolic dishes central to the celebration of family, community, and shared ethnicity. The mothers and daughters in this photo have gathered to celebrate Girls' Day, as we can tell by the Japanese doll display in the background. We can guess that the partygoers are eating Japanese food, as suggested by the chopsticks on the plates. New Year's Day, or Oshogatsu, was the major holiday for Japanese Americans, whose ways of celebrating varied somewhat depending on the region of Japan from which they had come. A central New Year's food, rice cakes or mochi, entailed elaborate, often communal preparation called mochitsuki. Rose Honda recalled that relatives and friends would gather a few days before New Year's for this festive occasion. And women spent hours preparing special dishes beforehand, since supposedly no work should be done on that day. They labored to prepare a range of emblematic dishes, invoking health and good fortune for the year to come. Most Japanese families began New Year's Day with ozoni, a clear soup in which the mochi floated, symbolizing prosperity. Such cultural practices faced severe testing in the crucible of World War II. Japanese American family and community life on the West Coast was shattered by forced uprooting and incarceration during the war. The Issei and Nisei struggled to adjust to the crude communal facilities in the hastily constructed camps. Nisei artist Mineo Kubo's drawings of the barracks, latrines, and mess halls, and her description of the camp fare convey the disruption of pre-war family routines and diet. Confined in the Topaz camp in Utah, Okubo observed, often a meal consisted of rice, bread, and macaroni, or beans, bread, and spaghetti. At one time, we were served liver for several weeks until we went on strike, end quote. Increasingly, many people, especially the youth, began to spend meal times with their peers rather than family members. Mess hall eating was only part of the wartime hardships faced by Japanese Americans, but it reflects their loss of autonomy and the impact of mass exclusion and incarceration on the family structure. As these paintings by Kongo Takamura show, the Issei and Nisei made efforts, despite their harsh circumstances, to maintain cherished customs and to bolster morale. Here we see Mochitsuki at Manzanar on December 31st, 1942. Sorry for my typo. The men are outside pounding the cooked glutinous rice, and inside a mess hall, women are shaping the hot, sticky mass into balls. We can see that they are socializing while they work, affirming community ties while they prepare the mochi deemed indispensable for good luck in the new year, and signaling their hopes for the future. Post-war resettlement would present continuing challenges. As before the war, food became part of the rebuilding of community ties and organizations. After the war ended in 1945, Japanese Americans were permitted to return to the West Coast, where they faced lingering racial hostility, residential segregation, and a swelling labor force. Jobs and housing were hard to come by. The Issei and Nisei scrambled to find wage-paid work. Many men went into gardening, while women entered the garment industry and, if lucky, clerical work. As the Rafu Shimpo newspaper showed, the focus of the early post-war years was survival. In this period, growing numbers of the Nisei, whose median age was 17 at the outset of war, began to marry and form families. Post-war Nisei households largely reflected the sexual division of labor that prevailed in mainstream society and the immigrant community. Whether as daughters or wives, Japanese American women were responsible for the bulk of domestic work. One of their key responsibilities was food preparation. As Japanese American families returned and communities took root, girls' club activities resurged in Southern California by the late 1940s. The Adamettes, who began as a group of sixth graders attending the West LA United Methodist Church, provide a dynamic example. As for the pre-war Nisei girls' clubs, service was an important component of the Adamettes' activities, and they had great impact in shaping church traditions after the war. Rose Honda, one of their two advisors, explained, quote, "They were the ones who started the bazaar. They called it May Bazaar. They went out to the strawberry fields and picked the strawberries and made strawberry jam and sold it. They were the ones who started the Easter breakfasts. They did all the cooking, and they must have served 50 or 75 or more people, 7 girls," end quote. Like Nisei girls' clubs before the war, the Adamettes utilized culinary skills to raise morale and strengthen community ties. They exemplify creativity, adaptability, and resilience. Another example can be found in the abundant Japanese American community compilation cookbooks that flourished from the 1960s onward. Japanese Americans did not invent the compilation cookbook, but I don't know if any other ethnic minority group has produced so many of them. Such recipe compilations became popular fundraising items. For several decades, it seemed as though every Japanese American church and club had its own cookbook. The first such Japanese American publication might have been East West Flavors, an elegant, practical cookbook created by the Women's Auxiliary of the West Los Angeles Japanese American Citizens League in 1965-66 to raise funds for a community organization. The recipes reflected the influences of Chinese, French, Italian, Japanese, Mexican, and mainstream American cuisines. The majority of the contributors were women, but notably a few men also shared recipes. And the names of some contributors suggest interracial and interethnic friendships. What can we glean from these cookbooks as a wonderful historical source, as well as a source for great meals? Their pages reflect both continuity and change. Persisting features include a love for the flavors of Japanese food and the importance of holiday specialties. For example, many community cookbooks include a section on the meanings and process of preparing New Year's dishes. The Centenary United Methodist Church cookbook even includes how-to diagrams. The meanings and which suggests that many Japanese Americans need instructions. New Year's sections also often discuss cultural practices younger Japanese Americans may be unfamiliar with. So just as a note on this page, it tells the reader that the Japanese use 5 to 7 filling ingredients for maki sushi and never even numbers. However, it doesn't explain that this is partly to avoid the number 4, which in Japanese is a homonym for death and thus unlucky. As shown by the Orange County Buddhist Temple's Generation to Generation Cookbook, Volume 2, new technology such as the microwave has made some preparation faster and less onerous. Recipes for chocolate mochiko cake or azuki shortbread, not pictured here, display imaginative adaptation and experimentation. Japanese American community cookbooks not only show culinary creativity and adoption of some mainstream trends, but also humor and playfulness. Here are examples from a recipe collection from the Japanese American National Museum's volunteers. Vaguely Asian salad and next best thing to Robert Redford cake. The latter recipe, whose 1970s origin can be roughly dated by the choice of heartthrob, also suggests that increasingly busy schedules became a factor in the late 20th century lives of Angelenos, who might turn to the convenience of instant pudding mix and frozen whipped topping to save time. With the rise of the Food Network, the internet, and food blogs, the heyday of the Japanese American community cookbook might be over, but they remain a wonderful window into friendship circles, community spirit, and history. In conclusion, from the 1920s to the present, Japanese American girls and women have quite literally nourished their communities, preparing the food for a wide variety of private and public events, ranging from everyday meals to church fundraisers. They maintain Japanese cultural practices through the cooking of staple foods like rice and okazu, and special holiday dishes laden with symbolism. At the same time, they also introduced other cuisines into the ethnic community, adjusting flavors to suit Japanese American tastes. The Girls Club activities, the food sections of the ethnic press, the community cookbooks, and family recipes like those of Natsuo Fujimoto reveal the eclectic influences and the delight in experimentation that have expanded Japanese American foodways. This photo of a Japanese American New Year's spread, including tuna sashimi, teriyaki chicken, shrimp tempura, and lotus root, as well as spam musubi and finger jello, reflects this artistry, labor, and love. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I also want to thank the organizers for the panel here, Liladar Pense, who had reached out to invite me. It's a pleasure to be in the same panel also with Valerie Matsumoto and Lessa Palaio Lozano. And thank you to Lisa Hirai Suchitani as well for moderating this. And in the background, I also wanted to thank Sky for taking care of the logistics, for this panel. Thank you so much. So today I am going to speak on the issue of the rise in anti-Asian hate. And this is an urgent issue that has been occurring since the beginning of the pandemic. And I just want to offer some insights in terms of how to understand, how to make sense, of this rise in anti-Asian violence historically and in the contemporary context. Starting with anti-Asian hate, here is beginning with the massive protests that have taken place all across the nation that have spoken out loudly against the rise of anti-Asian hate in the recent past. Just to give you a broad picture of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, here are some quick numbers and statistics data on the AAPI community from 2018. There are 23 million Asian Americans, 1.6 million Native American and other Pacific Islanders that fall under this label. It is one of the most diverse groups with more than 50 ethnic groups coming from many different countries, speaking many different languages, and practicing various different religions. 6 of the groups make up 85% of all Asian Americans. And we see here, starting with the Chinese being the largest, followed by Asian Indians, Filipinos, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. 6 out of the 10 of Asian Americans are immigrants, and 70% of Asian Americans are proficient in English. We're expecting by 2055 that AAPIs are projected to be the largest immigrant group in the United States. In terms of the anti-Asian hate cases reported, I think Lisa had mentioned earlier in her introduction that there are now 6,603 cases reported. In March alone this year, we had 2,800 cases. And this is almost a doubling, from the period between March and February, March of 2020 and February of 2021. I think these numbers are also undercounted. Not everyone is actually reporting the cases. And, we need to be mindful of that. These are some of the breakdowns, of how many women are reporting the cases and by ethnicity, and the kinds of expressions of anti-Asian hate. The majority involve physical, the majority of cases are around verbal violence or verbal harassment, and abuse. A number of cases are also involving civil rights violations. And of course, a percentage is also physical assault, as we have witnessed in the news in the past year. So how do we make sense of this recent rise of anti-Asian violence? I think it's really important for us to keep in mind that, in fact, these are not exceptional events or aberrations, that are occurring, but in fact, they're really they must be situated in the longer history of anti-Asian violence and whatnot. What I want us to start off thinking about this anti-Asian violence is using this framework that involves sort of a triangulation between the political realm of the domestic and international politics, the economic realm, having to do with labor and trade, and then of course the representational realm, where we have so much media representations in the past that really kind of determine how Asian Americans are being perceived, the understanding of how they belong, and also controlling the immigration and citizenship possibilities for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Again, there is such a long history of anti-Asian violence throughout the United States, starting as early as, you know, the massive anti-Chinese violence that happened in the 1870s and 1880s. The Japanese-American internment, of course, the McCarthyism and anti-Chinese sentiments of the 1950s, the murder of Vincent Chin in 1982, and most recently, you know, in the recent past, is the post-9/11 attacks against South Asian Sikhs, Muslims, and Arab Americans. I'm not going to be able to go through all of these, but I just wanted to give a sense of sort of the consistent and persistent kind of violence that Asian Americans have been subjected to, you know, through this long history of being in the United States. So I want to just start with the discussion of the Chinese railroad workers, who were the first group that were brought to the United States in large numbers. And these are laborers, contract laborers that came to the United States, specifically with the intention of recruiting them to work on the railroad construction and other infrastructural projects in the United States. They came, you know, over 220,000 of Chinese laborers were recruited in the 1860s. And the 1860s is a significant moment because this is when we have also the proclamation the emancipation of Blacks in the United States of slavery. And so, you know, with that, you also had a need for labor. And what happened was that the Chinese were first looked at as the cheap labor, you know, to replace the labor that was that became a need at that time. And so, you know, we also come to look at the golden spike ceremony pictures that we see so often. And when we look at this picture, the Chinese are totally erased from the completion of the railroad. And so, you know, you look at this picture where you have so many of the Chinese workers and the celebration, you know, where there's an active erasure, you know, of the Chinese involvement in the construction of the railroad. Shortly after the completion, there was an influx of the workers going into hubs and centers where Chinese were located. And this is where you begin to see a flourishing of Chinatowns throughout the United States in different parts. And it was also the time when, with the influx of the railroad workers moving to Chinatowns, that coincided with disease outbreaks during the 1860s and onward. And there was a moment in which the racialization of the Chinese were also in fact connected to these rising of diseases. And so you had Chinatowns that were understood, you know, as places where they were in fact sites where these diseases were initiated. And so there was a massive campaign in the 1800s, you know, around the connection between certain diseases like smallpox, like leprosy, etc., that were connected to the Chinese. And that also began to create anti-Chinese sentiments. So when we look at, you know, the pandemic of the past year, you know, we can see these sort of roots of racializing of diseases go back, you know, way in the 1800s and beyond. It also became apparent that once the Chinese workers had completed the railroad, that when they came into the urban areas, they were seen as major labor competitors that were displacing white workers. And you had, again, a number of these media representations and political cartoons that were targeting the Chinese to say that they don't belong. And here, you know, you have these really derogatory images presenting the Chinese here And Uncle Sam, no other than Uncle Sam, is saying the Chinese must go. And, these images are really being sort of fused, with the anti-Chinese sentiments that were already present, with connecting their connections to the diseases that were emerging at the time, and seeing Asian Chinese laborers as a competitive labor force. So in the 1870s, you had rallies and the rise of anti-Asian associations and groups that were, this is an image in San Francisco outside of the capital, where, you had these massive groups of people coalescing to protest against Chinese laborers, no cheap labor, no Chinese cheap labor for us, down with the Chinese. And, these were organized by the Working Man's Party, again, mainly around labor competition, racialized labor, Chinese as racialized labor in that sense. This was not only unique, it's not unique to San Francisco. We had over 150 riots, throughout the United States. The LA riot of 1871, in Denver, Rock Springs Massacre, Tacoma and Seattle, Hell's Canyon Massacre, etc. And these are just a sampling of them. You had hundreds of people being killed. Thousands of Chinese that were expelled from the communities where they had settled. And you also had Chinatowns that were set afire overnight. So these are kind of the experiences, early experiences of massive anti-Asian violence and riots throughout the United States. All these popular uprisings and riots against the Chinese were instituted also, these anti-Chinese hate were instituted, in law as well. So you had a passage of Chinese exclusion, a series of Chinese exclusion acts that were passed as early as 1875, the Page Act, which prohibited the immigration of Chinese women laborers, with the assertion that that Chinese women were coming as prostitutes and also spreading various diseases. That was followed by the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which prohibited the immigration of Chinese laborers as an entire group. You also had the anti-miscegenation laws in place. So many of the Chinese men, the laborers who had come over to work in the railroad construction, who stayed behind, were in fact unable to form families and households because of these anti-miscegenation laws and because of the shortage of Chinese women because they were excluded by the 1875 Page Act. Again, there were continued forms of exclusion through law and containment of Asians through law. The California Alien Law Act of 1913 basically prohibited ownership of lands by aliens ineligible for citizenship, and all Asian Americans, Asian migrants at the time were excluded from that. And by the Immigration Act of 1924, all Asians were excluded. These laws were not repealed, until really by 1965, which, is the law that really changed the demographic of Asian Americans. Moving along to looking at the media representations, which really play a tremendous role in terms of projecting certain images and derogatory images, against Asians, are the novels and films, around Dr. Fu Manchu. You had these massive campaigns, during World War II against the Japanese as well. And all this is linked, war and labor, are linked issues here, and the racial group of Asian Americans were seen and represented as threat, as dangerous, as being deviant, and really just unsuitable and undesirable subjects and citizens or immigrants to the United States. Women were also not excluded. You had the portrayals of Dragon Lady emerging as early as the 1930s, and these continue, on to present day. I mean, both the previous images, of Yellow Peril, the perpetual foreigner who cannot assimilate, into the United States, and the Dragon Lady is present and layered on top, of one another through time. And it's still shaping the psyche, American psyche, in terms of how they come to understand Asians. Here is a particularly disturbing image that was in the magazine, the Fortune magazine in 1942. And here you have the different faces of Japanese, and you can see that everyone cannot be trusted, women, workers, soldiers, diplomats, capitalists, entrepreneurs, etc. So this again is a wholesale understanding of how the Japanese here in particular is racially as a group, seen as dangerous to the United States. And what happened with all that campaigning and the political context of the time, what led to the massive incarceration of Japanese Americans. Over 120 Japanese Americans were interned, women, children, and men. These are families that were removed under the assumption and the rhetoric that they were a security threat to the nation. And of course, there was no proof. There was actually many people speaking against the lack of evidence that supported this. And so this is an ongoing sort of anti-Asian violence and hate that is being carried out throughout the early 20th century. And so we come to today of, in particular, what really sparked the Asian American communities to mobilize was really around the Atlanta shooting, where 6 Asian women were killed. And we also see that in the cases that were reported around anti-Asian hate, 2/3 of those were submitted by Asian American women. So just to take, a look at why is that? Why are women, Asian American women in particular, being subjected to or targeted more so than other demographics? And so we turn to really the history of the military sexual complex involving American military and the institution of sex work that is in Asia, and the intense sort of objectification of Asian women, through this creation of rest and recreation zones for military personnel, the setting up of the entire infrastructure for women to become sex workers and whatnot, but also the violence that became that was initiated, around that military sexual complex. And these are some historical images, that capture the presence and of American military and the objectification of women's bodies and the sexualization of Asian women's bodies. Here, again, it's reinforced by popular culture. The World of Susie Wong, Full Metal Jacket are some of the examples. And, there's no shortage of examples that illustrate that. And, we see the consequences sort of working out and sort of in real everyday lives, of Asian women, and ultimately, this is really about the objectification is about domination. It's about control. It's about power, and so we see the violence that's presented today against women is in many ways connected to this continued objectification of women as bodies to be controlled, bodies that can be violated and subjected, etc. And this collusion of events, have really kind of brought that attention to exactly what is going on here among the attacks of the of Asian women. in this case. I turn quickly to the current moment in a sense that, of course, there are many contingencies that contribute, to any particular moment, whether it is the violence that were targeted against Chinese railroad workers after the completion of the railroad, the Japanese internment, the Vincent Chin incident, the post, 9/11 events. And our particular moment here is that, yes, there is the COVID-19 pandemic in which, the leaders of our government, the former leaders of our government, the Trump administration, were using rhetoric like the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, and the Kung flu, which really ignited, the animus that has been so steeped in U.S. society. And there's that in many ways sanctioned, this targeting of Chinese, and sanctioned the rage that would be projected against the Chinese. At the backdrop of it, though, is that a few years, we've been in a moment of US-China economic competition and a trade competition, and all those, the rhetoric in the previous years before the pandemic hit, there was a lot of anti-Chinese sentiments that were already being cultivated and being mobilized, and that sets the larger frame in which, the Chinese virus, right, the Wuhan virus and the Kung flu was introduced, right, and really kind of sparked. It was the straw that broke, the camel's back, or really it inflamed the entire process of anti-Asian hate. You also had, we're now a year into the pandemic. There are tremendous strains. People are feeling the loss of loved ones. They're feeling the social isolation that we've all been subjected to. We're also feeling the economic distress, especially among the working class, among, the people who are already living in precarious situations are now, feeling this incredible pressure, and they're living in distress, and there's no particular outlet, and there's no particular sign of having this relief, among them. So I think all this becomes, factors in creating an environment, in which we have this enormous reignition, of the animus and anti-Asian hate and violence that is tapping into the already existing, persisting layering of ideas of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, as being perpetual foreigners, as being the yellow peril, and as objectified sort of subjects. So, this is the conclusion of the anti-Asian, the rise of anti-Asian hate at this moment. I'm happy to take answers after this talk. So, thank you.
All right, that's a lot to follow. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thankful for the invitation to speak with you all this morning and to follow such esteemed colleagues and such generous content. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you, of course, to the UC Berkeley Library and Lilahar for coordinating this panel and for the opportunity to share with you all a bit about Asian Pacific Islanders and librarianship, and how being a Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian has influenced my leadership and dedication to service. The responsibility or kuleana that I feel to our communities has led me down the path to be the youngest person and first Pacific Islander elected as president of the American Library Association, the largest and oldest library association in the world. So I'll be weaving personal anecdotes and sharing my personal story to share the history of both the American Library Association and Asian Pacific American Librarian Association, focusing on the values of my upbringing. The story of libraries and service predates me, of course. I am following in the footsteps of my kapuna, my elders, and our ancestors. I am following in the footsteps of generations of librarians who have fought for equality, fought for desegregation of libraries, and fought for information access for all. not just those who had the wealth and privilege to access tools. These fights and the advocacy of generations before benefit everyone in creating a society committed to civic responsibility, social justice, and intellectual freedom. So my story, as a Los Angeles born and raised mixed race Native Hawaiian woman living in the diaspora on Tongva land, starts with my grandparents, Al and Mary Palaio. Both Hawaiians who were born before Hawaii's statehood and who left Hawaii because the opportunities they needed weren't there for them, and who stayed in California because of the Hawaiian community they created away from home. Helping establish the Los Angeles Hawaiian community, which is the basis for my co-authored book, Hawaiians in Los Angeles, my grandparents and their extended ohana and new family helped establish the largest ho'olalea, which is like a Hawaiian festival, on the continent. They helped establish the first Hawaiian civic club on the continent and supported in every way they could the perpetuation of Hawaiian culture, values, and a way of life for future generations. This was their kuleana, their responsibility to us, and it is our kuleana to carry that work forward. So I'm sure most of you know the history of Hawaii, but just in case, I'd like to contextualize a little bit where I'm coming from and the terms I'm using. I am by no means a historian or an expert and speak as a community member. So when I speak of being Native Hawaiian, I speak as someone whose ancestry is traced to before the 1778 arrival of Captain Cook to the Hawaiian Islands. Someone whose ancestry dates back to before 1810, when King Kamehameha on the right there united the Hawaiian Islands and established the Hawaiian monarchy, setting the path for one of the most literate societies in the world and a palace that had electricity before even the White House. My Native Hawaiian ancestry is also one in which my people were coerced into giving up their lands through a series of political moves made by American-born plantation owners who were living in the kingdom and later the Republic of Hawaii. Since the arrival of Captain Cook, Hawaiians had been quickly introduced to capitalism and ownership in the form of loss of land, loss of life, and loss of broken treaties in the name of capitalism and expansion. And as these introductions occurred, migrations in and out of the islands began. After Cook's ship left and other European voyagers began visiting the islands, Hawaiians began to leave as crew members. By the time many European ships arrived in the islands, their crews had been at sea for months, and many crew members jumped ship, never to return. These ships still needed a crew, however, so they used Hawaiians to fill in the gaps. These Hawaiians sailed all over the world, but primarily settled along the west coast of North America. Washington State and Vancouver both can claim some of the earliest Hawaiians on the continent, dating back to the late 1700s, settling as fur traders. Following, missionaries and businessmen from many countries came into the islands, bringing Christianity, pineapples, plantation life, and more. So as money was made off the Hawaiian people and their labor, immigrants from Asia, the Pacific Rim, and Portugal arrived to work the sugarcane and pineapple plantations to make Hawaii a port, one which many different countries, including Japan and America in particular, wanted to control. So in 1892, a group of American plantation owners overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy, locking Queen Liliuokalani in a room and putting the final nail in the coffin of Hawaii's entrance into America. At that point, Hawaii became annexed and would eventually become a territory, and then became an American state as we all know it in 1952. And I say this also with the full knowledge and acknowledgement that statehood and American citizenship continue to be contested by my people, and that the sovereignty movement continues to push for self-determination and ruling. So with statehood came more migration, including the migration of my grandparents, both due to military. Pacific Islanders and Hawaiians specifically sign up for the military in higher numbers than many other races and ethnicities, and to other industries such as the booming Southern California aerospace industry, aiding the growth and boom of Hawaiian culture during the 1970s Hawaiian Renaissance, coordinating with the movements and activism of other AAPI communities. And that activism leads me to my work with APALA, the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association. Created to address the needs of Asian Pacific American librarians and those who serve Asian Pacific American communities, APALA was the successor to the Asian American Librarians Caucus, a discussion group within the American Library Association's Office for Library Outreach Services. That discussion group was founded in the 1975 ALA Annual Conference And in 1980, Apollo was established as a nonprofit organization, and we celebrated our 40th anniversary last year in the midst of the pandemic, which seems to be ongoing, the anniversary and the pandemic. Asian Americans comprise one of the 4 ethnic and racial groups that are underrepresented in the library profession as compared to the US population as a whole, and make up just 3.5% of the library workforce. Apollo continues to push for representation and is a home for many Asian Pacific Americans in librarianship, such as myself. This organization, in combination with the Joint Conference of Librarians of Color, a labor of love by the 5 National Associations of Librarians of Color, which happens every 4 years, helped elevate and share my leadership development as a Pacific Islander and as an Asian Pacific American, allowing me to unapologetically live my values out loud and in print. The mentoring and network opportunities in Apollo and in the National Associations of Librarians of Color not only tie into my overarching guiding value of kuleana, but allow me to practice ha'aheo, being proud of my people, something that can be a struggle in professions that are over 80% white like librarianship, and organizations like Apollo where the P in APA sometimes doesn't get the same love and attention as other groups within our umbrella. When we disaggregate Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians from that umbrella, representation decreases exponentially. While this sometimes feels lonely in Apollo, Apollo is a community that embraces the individual and all of our backgrounds to create areas of connection and meaning. We provide resources around shared goals and values, and kukua or support when we can through grants like Talk Story, which is for family literacy programming, and professional development opportunities like formal mentorships and webinars. Disaggregating within the umbrella also encourages us to look at issues within our communities, such as how Pacific Islanders can support the work to combat xenophobia and anti-Asian violence. Within the larger AAPI umbrella, we can also be encouraged to face anti-Blackness in our own communities and support our fellow people of color. The intersections of our communities that allow us to support one another in times of need are stronger than those differences that divide us. And by recognizing both, we can come out stronger, leading together for change. Which brings me to the final topic that I was asked to speak about today, leadership as a diaspora Pacific Islander and my path to president of the American Library Association. Imi Ike, or seeking knowledge, is a foundational value for me in my path to leadership and librarianship. As the Akamai one in the family, which means smart, but my cousins would really call it the scary, bossy, smart one, I was the oldest and took care of my younger siblings and cousins, as you do when you're the oldest. I feel like this naturally led me to want to be a teacher, but after my first visit to Hawaii at the age of 19, directly connected to the Aina or land for the first time in my memory, my path began to change course. There was so much about our Hawaiian history that I had no idea about, and the course of my studies shifted dramatically to incorporate any aspect of Hawaii when I could. The Hawaii that I had been taught by the diaspora community was one where you did what you had to do for your family and your community, and you did it the best you could. That included joining the military and leaving Hawaii for basically forever to raise your family because you couldn't afford it back home. And you dreamed for decades of finally winning Hawaiian homeland and returning. The Hawaii I learned about in the diaspora also included creating an idealized version of Hawaii for your children and grandchildren so that they would be nothing but proud of their roots. This is the lens that I grew up with, one not too far off from stereotypes of a very giving paradise, welcoming to tourists and full of aloha. Despite my grandmother growing up in poverty and only going up to school to 8th grade, and my grandfather's family struggling to hang on to their land in Kipuhulu on Maui, which he finally succeeded in just after he got his own Hawaiian homeland and not too long before his death. The Hawaii I visited certainly had these idealistic qualities, but I also saw firsthand the struggle and learned about the struggle my grandparents went through and felt the pull of what was lost because of colonization and what was being rediscovered and rejuvenated thanks to those who knew continuing down this path wasn't the only way. Seeking this knowledge and exploring it is what actually drove me to libraries. The research part of it, the discovery of information that was right there, and the radicalness of what can happen when one is armed with the right tools. I wanted information, this information specifically, to be a part of the narrative of our ancestors and their struggles and how we came to be. So with Imi Ike guiding the way, I knew that my work and my career must be rooted also in lokahi, or unity. To me, librarianship and being a member of this world is being entrenched in equity, diversity, and inclusion for all BIPOC. Because our numbers are smaller, advocating and being an ally to others, especially our fellow Indigenous and Black Ohana, is where the strength of our values lie, and has been the main focus of my work in APALA and ultimately will be ALA. We are only as strong as our weakest person, and supporting each other is the best way to get there. So one of the highlights of my career, putting lokahi into practice on a large scale, was helping to plan the third Joint Conference of Librarians of Color in 2018. All 5 of the National Associations of Librarians of Color that were read off in my bio came together to put on a multi-day conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico. All of the proceeds from the event were reinvested directly back into the associations and our members. And the vibe of the conference was power, love, and centering our own experiences. Seeing where those experiences are similar and where they are different helped us to support our Black colleagues over this last year and a half especially, and move towards an anti-racist profession, which is at the core of what our professions and our associations need to be doing. The unity that we felt was even evident in the things we didn't get quite right at JCLC, and that we don't always get quite right in doing this DEI work. We wanted to be inclusive of all races, ethnicities, genders, identities, sexual orientations, socioeconomic classes, and abilities. And when we missed the mark, the steering committee stopped, listened, apologized, and tried to make it right, setting the example for what I hope all things can be in the future. We can't all know everything, and only by working together can we really even know anything. And this admission, I feel, that we can't know everything and be everything and do everything is seen as a weakness in many circles. Certainly many of the ones I run in, but the humility, humbleness, is probably one of the most important values that I keep close to my heart, and is one that I think sets us Hawaiians and as AAPIs apart. We are, of course, not the only culture to value humbleness, but this, combined with our other values, sets us up to be compassionate, empathetic leaders who continue to grow and learn. So as a member of the American Library Association Executive Board, I was high enough on the excitement of getting to have a seat at the big table that I volunteered for an impossible task: assessing ALA, almost 150-year-old organization, and determining what change was needed. The answer of if change was needed was yes, it absolutely was. ALA, just like many of our organizations, needs change, and lots of it, especially in our governing structure. There are so many systemic barriers to participation that it's hard to know where to begin. But that first volunteer effort as a board member led to an appointment as chair of the Steering Committee on Organizational Effectiveness, often referred to as SCOE for my library folk out there. That committee, over the course of 2 years, spoke to thousands of ALA members and provided a 60-page recommendation on how ALA can improve on its strengths and commit to real change to reduce barriers to participation and open the association to better and more fulfilling member engagement. Getting through those 2 years, I will tell you, was not easy. When I accepted the appointment, I had no idea what awaited me, but I quickly met very passionate members who passionately told me all the ways that what I and the committee was doing was wrong, backhanded, undemocratic, and an insult to our profession. Had I had a bigger ego, or had I had one singular vision for what that outcome of our work would be, the whole thing might have blown up and been practically over before it began. But instead, I took it, and the committee took it, with humility, to improve, to challenge our group to do better, and to model the type of work and association we want to see ALA become in the future. While the work of SCOE ended with that report, the work of reorganizing ALA continues forward, and in the next year or two will be more or less solidified. And while the large structural changes take formal votes and bureaucracy to run through before they can take effect, there are smaller cultural shifts that have already begun, because we as ALA members challenged ourselves to also do better, think differently, and be humble. ALA, like all of our organizations, is not perfect, but by opening itself up to newer and different voices such as mine and many of my colleagues I served with on what was literally the most diverse executive board ever in the association's history, I am hopeful that it can become the association we need it to be today and reflect the libraries that we have now, including Hawaiian libraries and Hawaiian librarianship, not the elitist ones of 100 years ago. And all of this brings me back to kuleana, my responsibility, our responsibility to one another, our desire to be of service to one another and the greater good. Whether it is opening access to resources, integrating our indigenous ways of knowing into structures, being the only one in the room, or bringing together a group of Hawaiians to talk story and support one another, our kuleana is rooted in collective good, and that good brings others in. Queen Kapiolani's Olelo No'eau, kind of like it's a proverb, kulia I kanu'u, stays with me through everything I do and everywhere I go. Striving through hard work for excellence is what we do as Hawaiians, as AAPIs, as BIPOCs, as members of our community. My family was not one rooted in traditional activism. We were one rooted in survival and celebration, and the work of those who came before me allow me to achieve things I never thought possible. That route allows me to be an activist and information professional, pushing back against a history within libraries of marginalization, elitism, and racism. So thank you all for allowing me to share my roots, my kuleana, and a bit of history about AAPIs and libraries. I know my story is not unique, and I know that so many of you out there share similar stories of family struggle and changing expectations and increased activism, which can take so many forms. And our collective stories are just that though, ours, and each one is important and will inspire someone else. So please share your stories, and not just during AAPI month, but every month, and share your kuleana with us and help us move our communities forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a very inspiring speech and presentation. You made us think about kuleana, and I'm sorry if I do mispronounce it, or Ike, the pursuit of knowledge. I'm very grateful to all of our presenters, beginning from Lisa Hirai. I was not sure whether it's the right thing I'm getting into, because I'm a misplaced immigrant to this country, and I deal with Eastern Europe and Latin America. So some people question, what are you doing in Asian American Pacific Islander community? But I'm an internationalist at heart. And that brings me to say thank you to Professor Valerie Matsumoto. I remember her when I was a student at UCLA, a mature student. She was always supportive in the library. She was a regular user of our library, and I'm grateful to Loksu for her work also in Latin America, and Lesa, because I remember when you're a rookie, you join these professional organizations because you're inspired to join one, but you're not really sure. So Lesa was there to kind of patiently guide me throughout the process. So thank all of you for presenting. I had some questions here. There was one question from an anonymous attendee, and perhaps one of you can chime in to answer it. It's less curious, what chop suey, a term that might have been used by Nisei in reference to the hybrid dishes being developed in the 30s, or else needed familiar term for non-Japanese patrons. Notice the signage in Salt Lake City photo, and I believe that refers to Professor Matsumoto's presentation. So if you would like to answer that, we'll be very grateful.
I'm delighted that somebody asked that, because I couldn't stop and talk about the photos. That one is very interesting. It really reflects how Japanese Americans loved Chinese food, and that Chinese restaurants were the place that many early Asian immigrants and other ethnic immigrants could find service, and where they would not be turned away. And so Chinese restaurants hold a very important place for the early Japanese American communities, and they loved this food. Chop suey has its own really interesting history, as Professor Loxiu probably could say at great length. And there are scholars like Ren Chu Yu have written about this, but in this case, actually, I think it refers to actually the Chinese American form of chop suey, which became beloved by Japanese Americans, and not a reference to the other foods that Japanese Americans were experimenting with. They really did like Chinese food and Chinese American dishes. But what that cafe represents is the mixture, because in Japanese words, it says udon and nihon meshi on the sign, which means Japanese noodles and Japanese food, but also chop suey, right? Noodles and chop suey are the big draw there. So we can tell what was popular, what people liked to eat. And Locke, do you want to add anything?
I would just say that chop suey became so popular, at the beginning of the 20th century. And there are many myths about how it became so. But, it is the fact that, it was associated with a visit by a high a minister from China. Much of it has been disproved, but nonetheless, I think the idea of chop suey being a culinary specialty among the Chinese immigrants that were cooking this really spread, throughout the country, in New York, in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and then all over the nation. And it was basically a food that was invented in the US, pretty much. And it's made up of, different, what we think of in Chinese as sort of like leftovers, like food that you can find of various kinds to put together. And there are many variations of it. I don't think there is one way of cooking it. And that's been, and it's presented in a way that it's mostly for working class people as well. They're priced in a range that is affordable, that is, really kind of serving the larger popular sort of clientele. And it just really picked up, until the 1960s, really, that was displaced.
Thank you so much. There is another very challenging question to me as a librarian, but perhaps you can chime in and try to answer it. All of the panelists today have discussed the importance of building connections, historical and contemporary, both within and between our communities. Given the challenging historical moment of the pandemic that we find ourselves in, what suggestions do you have for us to continue this work? So any one of you, and I can repeat the question, it's quite long, but very complex. So yeah, your answers are really welcomed.
Do you mind just repeating it? I'm sorry.
Sure.
It is very
I will read it again in a very slow way. All of the panelists today have discussed the importance of building connections, historical and contemporary, both within and between our communities. Given the challenging historical moment of the pandemic that we find ourselves in, what suggestions do you have for us in the audience to continue with this work? So Lisa, as a librarian, any suggestions? Professor Matsumoto and Sue and Suchitani as academicians, any advice for us as a librarians, paraprofessionals, colleagues, and attendees? That will be great.
I can take a stab at it. It is actually, a crucial moment for us to think broadly and, through historical connections, and also connections across, BIPOC communities. And we're all struggling. And I think, the struggles that we face are interconnected. They do not happen in isolation. We're related to one another, through the structures that we are placed in and positioned in. And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind. I understand that, one of the crucial things that have happened recently, around in addressing the pandemic is the passage of the COVID-19 hate crime. And I think that is a legislation that we need to be very concerned about, because it can be used as pitting communities against one another. The issue of safety with the issue of heavy policing, which are, historically, and that continues to be so, targeting, really exercising a form of anti-Black violence. And I think that's a crucial point where we need to find an intersection of how do we grapple with this complicated issue, beyond sort of pitting the two communities together, using sort of, thinking through a non-carceral form of thinking, of community safety and community protection, that I think we need to reimagine, what it means, not to think of it at the end of the road of how do you address this, but really to think of how do you prevent, through education, through sort of local organizational work, to create conversations and understanding, and really make structure, to think hard about the structural issues of how, how this situation is produced. And so, even as Asian Americans are facing this moment of the rise of anti-Asian hate, we mustn't, forget that, the long struggles, of anti-Black violence, with the police, especially. And this is, so recent in our memory in 2020 and ongoing, this is an ongoing issue. And I would just urge that we do not lose sight of that we're not, looking just in isolation in a very myopic way, but think broadly about how to solve the problem together across groups.
And I would add, that one of the ways that I think that we can do that has been highlighted during the pandemic is our ability to come together in times like this virtually, right? Like normally I would not probably be able to come up to Berkeley to do this presentation and to be able to hear all of these voices and to have this conversation. And so making sure that as we start going back out into the world, we have our in-person conversations, but so that we don't stay myopic, we're also connecting with folks from across the country and internationally so that we can create that community and to bounce ideas around off each other, right? Like, I don't quite understand this concept. I don't understand this, one of my Japanese American friends, for instance, was like, I don't understand, time in camp because my parents never talked about it. Like, where do I even start in conjunction with anti-Blackness and how this was all working together, and I don't know that she would have felt comfortable asking those questions in a very broad group, right? She had to be able to know and have those conversation kind of starters available to her. So making sure that we're making space for each other and making sure that we're making space for each other to be vulnerable also and ask questions and be receptive to hearing answers that maybe we also don't like, I think is going to be very important for continuing to build community.
Thank you so much. There is another question from Professor Clara Chu, and the question is as follows. Your excellent presentations used historical images and documentations to tell our stories and counter erasure. Are there gaps in historical documentation in our library and cultural institutions that need to be addressed? If so, how can scholars, students, archivists, museum specialists, librarians, and community collaborate to address such gaps? So if you have any suggestion from your academic or library perspectives, that will be great to have.
Wow, that's a fantastic question. Hello, Clara. We miss you at UCLA still, although we're thrilled that you're continuing to have a glorious career. And I know everybody else will also have things to say. I think that this is a great moment. Locke has already outlined the great diversity among the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities that is often unrecognized, right? And I think that we really need more materials from all these different communities, particularly the more recent post-1965 and post-1990 groups and refugee groups. This would be really important. Voices from within communities. We need more attention to materials that give us insights into the lives of women, both from the early 20th century, late 19th century to the present, and to acknowledge unpaid labor as well as wage paid labor. We need to, I would love it if, as a historian, if all of the people who are viewing have keeping a track of their own responses and experiences through this time period. We're living through this time period that is really, unprecedented in all these things coming together in our lifetimes, and just our pandemic experiences and experiencing all of the different issues with race relations, and I think that this is and as well as global climate change crises. So I hope that people are keeping journals and keeping diaries. Sometimes that's hard to do, but scholars of the future will be really grateful if you do. And I also encourage everyone, students, to interview your elders. And I think that this is part of what Lessa refers to in terms of kuleana, right? And group responsibility. This is a great opportunity to gather the stories and the wisdom and the experiences that we need to learn from. So these are a few ideas, and I'm sure others have, and Lisa and Locke and Les have other ideas too.
We have 1 minute left, so make it quick. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to push anybody, but we are bound by time commitments. So you can write questions to me and I can forward them to our speakers if that sounds reasonable. I'm not trying to gag anybody. I also wanted to thank library administration. Why? Because, for example, Dean of the libraries, Jeffrey Mackey Mason, reached out to me personally. I'm a rank librarian, but he wrote to me, how is my family in India doing in the times of COVID? Many Americans from all types of walks have reached out to me and offered their support. Joanne New Year Ramirez, Bet Dupuis, Salva Ismail, and Susan Schwartz are some of the names which keep on constantly on the path of DIB work. So I'm very grateful to them. And we are at the end. So please join me in thanking our presenters, and please forgive me once again for cutting it short, but 12:30 is 12:30 and people have to go. So Valerie, please forgive me, Locke and Lisa. We love you all, Lisa, and good luck. And thank you so much for your help. Namaste and kuleana to all of you. And we will meet again once in person. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye now, everybody.